The Finance Committee of County Board for Wednesday, February 27th will please come to order. We'll have a roll call, please.
Mr. Lear?
Present.
Mr. Legess?
Present.
Mr. Washington?
Present.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Present.
Mr. Byrne?
Present.
Ms. Weber?
Present.
Mr. Payton?
Present.
Ms. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Present.
Mr. Zenz?
Present.
Ms. Haas?
Present.
Mr. Swanson?
Present.
Ms. Zucolo?
She stepped out.
Mr. Dunnell?
Present.
Mr. Wheeler?
Present.
Mr. Seroy?
Present.
We have a quorum.
I have no requests for public comment. Are there any public comments? Seeing no requests for public comments, we have no presentations. We'll move to approval of the minutes. The January 23rd minutes have been distributed. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Byrne moves. Ms. Haas seconds. Any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We move to the Treasurer's report. Mr. Africano, would you come up, please?
Good morning. All I have to report is just the progress on the payment plan that we're running through the Treasurer's office. It's going well. You know, we have the 4-payment plan that this is overlapping with too, so we're getting busier. I think we've probably taken in a little over $1 million, $1.5 million. And so far so good. We're speaking tonight at the First Ward meeting to discuss it, and we've been out to Pembroke and around the county, different places. So that's all I have to report. If there are any questions.
If there are no questions, can we have a motion to combine and approve the Treasurer's report? Mr. Washington, Mr. Zinn, any discussion on the motion to combine and approve? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Finance Department, Mr. McCarty. You have the documents in front of you from the Finance Department, so you can begin to examine those. We'll start with the miscellaneous financial reports. Any discussion of those? Good morning.
Good morning.
What kind of news do you have for us today?
Morning. Good news today.
That's great.
So we went from unsettling news last month to good news this month. So, but we'll start out with some of the regular monthly reports. Just a year-end update on the sales tax. Nice year-over-year increase of 6.1%. So I think that's a very positive sign. Local economy as well as what we collect here for the county. So there's the note 4% last year, 6% this year. So that's a couple of nice trends showing up. Use tax is also showing. Stop me if you guys have any questions specifically, but let's see here. Where did I put use tax at? We're starting to show some higher trend in use tax with the change in the online sales tax collection process. We'll see if that becomes a trend or not, so we're watching that closely, but a couple of nice increases there year over year, 8% in FY17 and 12% in FY18. So just some year-end numbers as we close it out. Analysis there. I don't know if there's any other questions specifically.
Any questions in regard to these miscellaneous financial reports? If there are no questions on those, we'd move on to cash flow. Cash flow.
cash flows.
TAWs and cash
Yeah, the
flow.
TAW update. The good news is, two sides of the good news that we closed, and only closed on the regular TAW amount of 2.5 million. So with the federal government remaining open, and we're almost fully caught up as far as to what we would call normal process for the receivables from the feds. We discussed, you know, the variance, and it looks, you know, like we could just go back to what we were looking at as our normal process. So that's what we did. So there's a lot of positive conversation. You know, it definitely connects to what we're going to talk about next. You know, it's all connected. But you know, I think First American Bank, they put a lot of time in a very short period of time, about a 2 to 3 week process. Approved, you know, an additional amount if we needed it, and as it came down to it, we did not. So it was a lot of work for thanks but no thanks, basically. But we appreciate, yeah, their time, and it also, I think, is a very good indication that we have creditors willing to step up and partner with us again. That speaks volumes, especially what we went through the last few years. So, you know, in the last few years, I never thought I'd say that we were approved for a TAW and we declined it, but that's what we did here a week ago. So, so that's good news. So we're following the normal plan, I guess, at this point, using the normal TAW that we categorized it in stepping out of this, you know, year by year, and that's kind of what this cash flow indicates right now, and estimates going forward, at least through July at this point. I ran a lot of scenarios through this spreadsheet, you know, and basically we went from, if the feds would have shut down again, and the timing of with the 30-day layoff, and the Fed agencies catching up, and if they would have shut down again, we absolutely would have needed the full amount to make it through the March payrolls. So we were in a situation just a few weeks ago only having literally one payroll in the bank, a little over one payroll, and now we have 4.5 heading into this week's. So the difference in just a few weeks time is pretty staggering. So
I think for the committee's sake, we would want to call attention to what April looks like, though, at the end of April. That's the low point in this cash flow analysis.
yeah, April will be probably the toughest month from what we just experienced anyway. You know, everything being normal after the 3 payrolls and keeping up with everything. But, you know, the difference with the number I highlighted there of 1.8, estimating approximately, is if you look at FY18, which is on maybe, I don't know on your copies, if it's right on the back side or right next to this one, for analysis, we estimate keeping up with our accounts payable process as we are now. So and staying within 30 to 45 days and keeping everybody up, and that's a lot different from a year ago, and how and what we were paying in the outstanding payables at the bottom on FY18. So even though the number may look a little tight, but the situation is way different, way better with the outstanding receivables being at such a low level. So this will continue to steadily increase and improve. Also note, in July is the first payment in the plan of paying highway back. We'll discuss more of that here in just a second. But so when we originally talked about the TAWs and needing for approximately 3 more years, there was a 3-year plan to pay highway back, and we're now, you know, we can start to see where we'll begin to do that once the full, or at least the first distribution of the property tax comes out. We have plans to start doing that. So
Any questions on cash flow? Good news makes it easy not to ask as many questions. If there are no questions, we'll move on to the draft fiscal year 18 year-end update for the major funds.
Yeah, the first one I want to bring to your attention is the changes in fund balance report. And you know, this report was used when we talked to Homestar and People's Bank for the original 2.5 TAW, and I want to thank them as well for continuing to partner with us. The 2-year, I want to bring to your attention the 2-year change in fund balance number of $5.5 million. That's a positive increase in fund balance over the last 2 years in all 3 major funds. That is an unbelievable number, and that's why I wanted to bring that to your attention. And then we'll look at what the actual fund balances are. But that's something to stop in and absorb for a second from what we've been through, for sure. And then if you flip and look at the actual fund balances, so we've given a historical trend for you, and we've left 2008 on there for a purpose, and hopefully that will become, you know, is the goal again, to get back to that level. But you can see, you know, even we're in a combined total. The first year that all 3 funds are in a positive combined fund balance total amount, and obviously there's still work to do for the general fund, but I believe, and we'll be working on that soon to figure out approximately when in fiscal year 19 that will become a positive number as well. While we're absorbing all that good news, we've got to also plug in that we literally have to do that plus more, the $5.5 million, do it and continue that process and duplicate that to reach, you know, the recommended goals, you know, of the fund balances and where we were at one time back in 2008. So with having a combined fund balance total of $9.6 million. So the positive 1.4 is good news, especially what we've been through in the last 4 or 5 years. But to be able to absorb an economic situation, whether that's from the federal government or something, you know, economic downturn that affects us, to be able to ride it out on our own, you know, we have to be back up to, you know, proper fund balances to be able to do that by ourselves and and stand on our own 2 feet. So, you know, that's
Steve, if my memory is correct, a number of years ago, the board did pass a resolution in terms of that goal. So this is established county policy that was passed by previous boards for those who are new to the board. You know, this is in writing as a goal.
That's correct, yep. So we're well on our way to that. So it's a good feeling and something to be appreciative of, and also to realize that we still got a lot of work left to do. So, any questions on fund balance?
Let's see, Mr. Kissinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, from your perspective, the $5.5 million, to what do you contribute that increase? Is there one major item, several small items? How would you summarize that increase?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Actually, you know, there's quite a number of things. Obviously, you know, with the increase that we've had in the Bedroll program, you've seen in these reports, you can see that why I bring these reports is these are some of the most critical ones that, you know, we watch. And, you know, sales tax, use tax, we've had some ups and downs in income tax and PPRT, the replacement tax, because of the state changing how they budget. But it's also, you know, there were a lot of cuts made. You know, this is you know, the pain that was felt through all this, every, you know, elected and appointed, board member, everybody, you know, participated and felt, you know, the pain of what we went through. And without all the cuts and then the advances, you know, we would not have been in a position to be able to, you know, start climbing back out of the hole. So it's really a combination of a lot of things, a lot of hard work, you know, and from a lot of people.
You don't see any one particular item that's a one only type that would do this.
Well, you know, the most significant is the bed rental program.
Okay.
As far as the dollar amount
That
is
would
concerned.
increase.
Yeah, and that's that's back in the first package.
I
Here.
I
You
can
want
read
a
that.
number, you know what I mean, as far as that change. 2 million.
Mr. Wheeler?
That's a good.
If I could
four.
ask, Mr.
Last
McCarty, how did the juvenile detention center sale in Will County impact the number?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that is about 2.3 million of this as well. Yeah, of the fund balance change. Yes, thank you. That's a big part of it, and $1 million of the surplus specifically for FY18 is the $1 million payment from Will County, the cash payment. The other is was write-off of previous payables, about $1.3 million, you know, so that's how that was split. So and then the ongoing benefit is the fact that we're not paying them right now for that service, you know, so that's an indirect service. And it's kind of a neutral effect on the bottom line. So the full impact is 2.3 million. So that has had a huge effect as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So from that standpoint, to continue this change in combined totals, we're still gonna have to stay tight in terms of expenses and figure out ways to increase income? Or if we just continue on the road that we're going now, assuming everything remains unchanged, we'll pick up $1 million or $2 million a year? Is that a fair summary?
Right. The net effect of the operations without the Will County activity was approximately 1.9 million for FY18 in the general fund. So, you know, obviously, if revenues can't or don't increase in our expenses, you know, that will slowly come down, you know, as the expenses go up. In order to keep going, yes, we definitely need to hold the line the best that we can, you know, as well as look at other, you know, any possibility to advance to the proper level of fund balance from where we're at.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move to the general fund interfund borrowing as of November 30, 2018.
So, yeah, the other side of, excuse me, there's two parts to the interfund borrowing. The board already did a resolution for the day-to-day, if you will, interfund borrowing. This is a snapshot, specifically as of 11/30/2018 for the year-end CAFR report that we're working on. So, and there's also an analysis of, you know, year to year over the past few years of the interfund borrowing, you know, and its decline. So, you know, the one thing to note as we, you know, have these discussions, that, you know, our fund balance snapshot as of 11/30, you know, that we just looked at is our cash position is quite different than our snapshot of fund balance. So when we, you know, the cash is on its own journey, and it's going to be a little longer, a few more years before, you know, general fund cash will be positive again. So still a lot of work to do, and our cash position is one important one to keep in mind that sits behind the scenes most of the time. So this is basically a snapshot that you see the two highway funds. We still have $3.4 million interfund borrowed from the highway, and we will begin in 2019 to begin to pay, you know, some of that back. But this is a lot smaller, a lot less, but still necessary because the general fund at that moment in time, you know, had a deficit cash position of $3.6 million. So still a lot of work to do. And cash, you know, our cash position is one of the important ones to keep an eye on. And this identifies the entry that we'll make as of 11/30, and then we take it back out of the system on 12/1, and then run day to day as the other resolution already identified. So
Any questions there?
this will need a resolution though, from the
This needs a
full board.
resolution. So what do we need, a motion?
Yes.
We need a motion in terms of general fund borrowing. Mr. Lejes moves, Mr. Kinzinger seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion, this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Lejes, Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess, Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Miss Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Peyton,
Aye.
Miss Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Miss Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Ms. Zucolo,
Aye.
Mr. Dennell, Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, next we move to claims recommended or not recommended for approval.
Yeah, the only, we have one claim this month for Alfred Ronan LTD that we received that was not recommended by the auditor's office per the notes at the bottom. So we're bringing it to your attention for your consideration.
Mr. Byrne.
Is there a reason why, thank you, Mr. Chairman, reason why we're not approving a payment to a vendor that we entered into a contract with via the board? And could this put us in breach of the contract, not paying?
I'm not sure.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
I would think so.
Yeah, the only communication we have is what was written at the bottom when it was sent to us for processing. So since it's not approved, the procedure is to bring them to the committee for the committee's review, and if the committee approves it, then we'll process it.
Could I make a motion that we approve it, and then moving forward, that this gets approved? We don't have to come back every month with this. This is a personal service contract that was voted on by the board and approved by the board.
That motion would be in order if you're prepared to make it.
Yes, I'd like to make it.
All right. Mr. Byrne moves. Mr. Washington seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion on the motion, we'll need a roll call vote. This is a motion to. Yeah.
I just want to make sure I heard it correctly for our sake. You said this one and any other ones?
Yes, moving
Was that
forward.
part of-
Moving
any
forward,
of
yep.
these?
For the length of this contract.
For the length of the
For
contract.
the length of the contract. Mr. Lejes.
I just had a question. It says that he isn't comfortable endorsing for payment for a lobbyist. Well, is he gonna cite some statute, or is he just not comfortable? I mean, can he not pay any bill that he isn't comfortable? I mean, I wish I could do that at home.
In his report to this committee, he does comment in terms of what his recommendation is. So if you turn to the report from the auditor, you'll see that he made a report response there. If you would want to speak at this time, or you can let his report speak for himself. That was sent out via email, so you'd have to have that from email. Any other questions, discussion? If there's no other questions or discussion, it's a roll call vote. We'll proceed with the roll call vote.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Lejes,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Miss Weber, Mr. Peyton,
Aye.
Miss Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Miss Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Ms. Zucolo,
Aye.
Mr. Dennell,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Is there anything more for Mr. McCarty?
Questions?
Seeing no other questions, comments, we'll move on. Sheriff, monthly update from your department, please.
Good morning. I really don't have a whole lot other than just a couple comments about our population and where we're going from the standpoint of numbers. When you talk about marshals and ICE, our marshal population has increased significantly over the last 4 or 5 months. And the indications that we get from them is that that will continue to increase a little bit. ICE continues to remain consistent. Our marshal numbers have gone up to 200, on an average of 225 a month. ICE has stayed consistent at about 150. Our locals are a little bit concerning at 270, which is a little bit high. So obviously those are the ones that we're responsible for first. So when our numbers get too high, obviously that means we move some people out. So we monitor that closely day to day. The one thing Steve did not mention in all the good news, I don't believe we've received December or January's ICE payment. Is that correct, Steve? We did get an email, however, that they are working on it because of the shutdown. The marshals, I believe, are up to date. ICE is not quite up to date yet, but we did get the email indicating that they are in the middle of processing it and will get it as soon as they can. And they did blame the shutdown. So, and the only last thing I would have, unless anybody has questions, is that what Chairman Wheeler said about the juvenile detention center and the inmate program, but I think it's important to let people know that you as a board, other department heads, elected officials have contributed to this, and this is a big recovery, and with everybody's involvement, everybody continues to work hard to get our numbers back to where they're workable, and I think it's a credit to everybody as well. So that's really all I have.
Are there any questions for the sheriff? Seeing no questions, thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
The auditor's office, Mr. Lee. Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning.
Morning.
Really don't have too much outside of what was already disseminated. There was some discussion, obviously, about a few things, and if there's any questions, I guess I could answer them.
Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Jake.
Good morning, Mr. Byrne.
What was your reasoning for not signing off on the payment to the lobbyist?
So I stated that in the report that I believe that we already have associations and representatives in place for such activities. And, you know, it is the purview of the board to authorize payments. I can only make a recommendation. So any of my recommendations would not result in a breach of contract or anything like that because I don't have the authority to stop any payments. It's just a recommendation.
Sure.
I mean, the reason I bring it up is because, for example, Kankakee City Schools employ or have signed with him. So, I mean, he's been employed within Kankakee County with other taxing entities, government bodies. That's the reason why I was just asking.
Sure.
This is standard practice for several public institutions, local government districts in this county and in other counties, that they do this procedure. Mr. Majest.
I'm assuming wasn't the contract with Ronan run through the state's attorney?
It was.
Okay.
Any other questions for the auditor in regard to his report? If there are no other questions, could we have a motion to accept the auditor's report? Mr. Burns moves. Is there a second? Ms. Zucolo seconds. I need discussion on the motion to accept the report. Hearing none, a voice vote is in order. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other business. As most of you are aware, the governor recently signed a minimum wage increase. The chairman has asked our county administrator to do an impact study. And so if you would come up, Anita, and we can discuss what you've been able to discern so far. This is happening rather quickly, and I think she's had to work really hard to put something together for us today.
Thank you. So what you have in front of you is a list. I took out the names. I downloaded every employee and their salary and equated it to an hourly and then average hours per month. And that's this sheet. It's kind of small, but I like things on one page. So what you see, each line is another employee. Over on the far left-hand side is noted part-time, and that comes into effect when you look at the impact. And in determining hours per pay period or annual hours, what I took for annual hours of part-time employees is just their hours in 2018, assuming that's kind of a static indication of how much they'd be utilized moving forward. There are several of these people that were hired during the middle of the year. So in that case, I took the number of hours they worked in 18 and just annualized the number. And what you see there is the hourly rate they're currently at, and at the top is the increase per the law that was signed 2 weeks ago, last week. So what you see is really the first increase is January 1st of 2020 to $9.25, and then July 1st of 2020 it goes to $10. So there's nobody that's going to impact. Our first impact, or 2020, July 1st of 2020, we have 2 employees, both within the animal control area. There are certain departments that really are more heavily hit than others. And so the impact, as you can see, is really quite small. If you go to the bottom where you look at the cost per year, it's a few $100s. So as these people roll in, and then in 2021, 2022, it really doesn't become a big impact until 2023, when we start to hit into our clerical level employees. And when you get to 23, 24, and 25, that's a lot of what we see happening, is those clerical level employees rolling in and the increases there. And then at that point, it's almost a double-edged sword, because then those are full-time employees. So instead of just part-time, which leaves us with a smaller, then we're getting into full-time people. So we have a much larger impact. You can see the impact in 2023. What's at the bottom of the page you're looking at is salary impact only. So 22,000 in 2023, 53 in 2024, and then 105 in 2025. So those last 3 years, it doubles every year. Yesterday afternoon, I took a look then also at the impact of overhead costs on top of that. It's a little dicier because of the part-time, full-time split, so I actually had to look at it by person, who was impacted by what, the IMRF impact, unemployment, workers' comp. Work comp came into play because there are some part-time corrections officers in here. And the rate for those officers is $7.66, I think, per $100 of salary, as opposed to those clerical level people where the rate of our work comp policy is 65 cents, obvious. So that made a big difference as well where those people roll in. But bottom line, when I look at all the years, it's another $35,000 on top of the salary. So it averages out to a 20%, but it doesn't roll out that way based on the classification of employee, largely work comp and IMRF, and when those roll in based on the employee type. So while the salary increase is under $200,000 over the course of this increase, it's $191,871. When we add an extra $35,000 in fringes, the total comes to $224,960, so roughly $250,000. The other thing that is not reflected in here is that there is an additional 15 employees that make between $15.01 to $16, and another 15 after that that make between $16.01 and $17. So if you look at the top where the average increase is, if we start addressing that and you have employees getting an 8 to 10% raise a year, increase a year, to try and keep those people at $15 or $16 an hour to 2.5, 2.25%, which is what we've really done for the bulk of our employees, that becomes a challenge. The other one thing I did want to mention is union contracts. Those really don't come into play in the current contracts. The current contracts all end in 2020 or 2021, and the impacted employees in those contracts don't roll in until after that date. So it doesn't impact the current union contracts, but negotiations on the next set of contracts is all going to be impacted by this.
Mr. Kinzer?
Yeah, I'm gonna play the other side of this. I'm not convinced that this is as bad as it looks on paper. If you factor in wage increases at 2.5%, 2 to 2.5%, which we're looking at, it appears to cover most of this, and that the county could be in a decent shape for this wage increase.
I think the first 3 years, you're right. I'm not worried at all. I am concerned once we get to 2025 or so.
But isn't it
Yeah.
true we give a wage increase every year, 2.5%, and it's almost gonna
Right.
balance out? I don't know if we're gonna have a significant impact. Where I see an impact potentially coming is that second tier.
Correct.
When we get close to the more trained and we find somebody coming on, because we're gonna be hiring new hires at $12 and $15 in 20.
Right.
That's when we're gonna have a problem, and I don't know what that means yet.
Right. You're
But
right.
in terms of cost to the county, I think it's in the range. That's my opinion.
Any other questions, comments? Is there anything more we need to do on this? Then I don't see anything, Mr. Chairman.
No, it's just to go through, I want to say the exercise because it diminishes the work that was done, but we needed to know this. And so, you know, we need to be able to, when we start looking at our 3 and 5 year projections, this factors into it, obviously. So thanks for the work because it is key.
Sure, nothing.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I wasn't saying that. But it was better to know that it's not going to hit us in the face the first couple
Right.
of years and then to be ready for it in the next.
I was
budgets.
really kind of surprised at really those first 3 years, how really minimal it was. So, right.
Mr. Kinzer?
In light of what our chairman said, I would like to personally say thank you for doing this work. May not have, well, it did everything it was supposed to do.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so then let's move on to the keyless entry system.
Do you want me to stay?
Yeah.
Okay. So the keyless entry system, Wes and I worked on this with input from Andy related to the buildings that we have now. Wes had a situation or was looking into keyless entry. I don't know if you want to talk about that. Wes did some work for possibly putting keyless entry into this building. And Andy asked me to look into what would happen if we tied that to a payroll system. So in other words, your access card would not only give you access to the building or the office, but would also be your clock in on Paylocity or what other payroll system we would utilize that would take care of both those pieces.
Yes.
This was in building and grounds, and we have a need to look at this because every time that we either lose a key, somebody leaves our employment and they don't have a master key, we have to go through and change all the locks. And so with that need being the way that it is, it's quite expensive. And so if we were looking at a keyless entry for the door, why not get one that could talk to a payroll system? And so we may not move to the payroll system right away, but at least we're ready for that next step if it makes financial sense to do so. So that was why I asked Building and Grounds to say, yeah, we agree with this, and then also to put it to finance to let them know what we're looking at and to kind of update the committee for when the time comes that we do have a proposal, that this is where the decision will be made. This is now where we go to a full-blown system, and then it may include changing our going from Paylocity to something else that would be more in tune with that system. So those that were on the board may remember we went to a less expensive system. Some years back it was supposed to be 25 grand, I believe, and now we're upwards of $84,000 because all of our special check runs that we had to do for back pay and all the special pay codes we have because of our contracts, and it looked good, like a good decision, but we didn't ask the people who worked with the system when we made that decision. So this time we're going to work with the people who have to work with the system because price is not always cost. And so I'm trying to bundle this into some type of an overarching solution because we have the courthouse who has swipe in. We have obviously all of the, the other facilities, the public safety that they swipe in, they secure the building. Why not have something that we could use for a time system as well? Because it's very labor intensive, extremely labor intensive to do this the way we do our payroll now. So did I miss anything?
No, that's
Okay.
about it. So really then what I did is reach out to a couple vendors, some nationwide vendors that do not only the payroll system, but tie it in to access entry. And kind of the question really was for Wes, does he move forward with the keyless entry into this building, or will that become obsolete when we look at this as an entire package in a few years or whenever the board decides that they want to look at that? And the conversation or the initial impact from both of them, and we had several conversations back and forth, especially with one of them on specifics, seems to be that their payroll, that payroll tie-in, they can make that logic work with the hardware that's installed currently. That's initial. They haven't looked at it in specifics, but that's kind of where that is right now, that it seemed that we wouldn't have to tear out all the keyless entry that's currently installed to reinstall, and having it already installed here at 189 wouldn't mean that that becomes obsolete whenever the board decides that they wanted to add that piece for payroll.
What action or motions might want to come before this committee, Mr. Chairman?
The motion would be, could we authorize up to, and I'll have to ask Wes what that amount was. I thought it was $4,500, but that's just what's in my head, but authorize up to that amount.
He's nodding no.
He's nodding no? That's good.
If you'd go to the mic, please,
The
Mr.
mic, yeah.
So what we were looking at, we had two proposals. One was for the both doors, the south door and the west door. I think what we're looking at is just doing the west door and having that be the main access point for the building. The proposal was $5,100, and that's just for the vendor to come in and install the system. We'd have to have a locksmith come in. I don't expect that to be much, maybe $300, $400. So in the realm of 5,500 is where it would be.
That allows us to, once we have our arms around that, this will work with a payroll system. So we don't have to come back here again to ask for that approval to say, yes, you're approved to spend that kind of money when it comes up again. So we're going to continue to work to make sure they talk to each other. And if that system doesn't, and it's going to be more, we'll come back. Is that?
Mr. Kinzer?
There was some question when this first came up. Has Kevin been involved in this and he's on board?
I can't speak to that. Mr. Andrews, has Mr. Duval been involved?
If memory serves me correctly, he was at the Buildings and Grounds meeting.
Yes.
And he popped in and offered some words. And I think most of his concerns were payroll related
Right.
with Anita.
Right. He came and talked to me after the building and grounds, and his big concern really was in tying in payroll and the ability to make sure that we worked with the finance group so that that feed from the payroll system into the GL would be easier than the previous one. Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
And
so
we did have the conversation because it came up about security and people's info getting hacked. They don't meet, if you will. There's no interface or anything like that. So he had no.
Oh, period.
There he is. He didn't have security concerns. He can tell you that himself.
Mr. Duval?
I'm sorry. Andy kind of addressed what I was doing. Mainly what I was saying is before we went any farther, make sure that the other parties that needed to be involved got inside the project. That had less to do with what Wes is talking about. That's when Anita said the payroll, since I was involved in the previous process, I was saying to make sure actually that Steve's department was involved with that and that the technology would work. But if that part wasn't tied in, you may, excuse me, I ran up the stairs. That could be a problem. So it had nothing to do with slowing the project down. It was just making sure another piece was added to it. And Andy kind of said what I was thinking. Excuse me. The one thing I did want to ask, what's more on a department level, is departments like myself and probably Wes, you're not thinking about taking all the keys away because we need an overriding one, right? You're just talking about your people, right? Does that answer your questions?
Yes, I think it does. Mr. Bones?
Thank you, Chairman. Does this?
Yes.
Hey, I've been called worse. Does this price include, you're going to have a machine and everything to program all of these keys, correct?
Yeah, we've already have the system out at Jerome Combs. So, for instance, when I was hired, I went out there, got my badge, and it's all right here. So anywhere I go, this lets me in. They program the key based upon what buildings you need access to. So for the employees in this building, they would have an ID badge that would only grant them access to this building. So yes, we have the machine right now to make these, because we have, like Andy said, the courthouse, the annex, Jerome Combs, all have this system already. Really, the only public building that doesn't is this one.
I would go ahead and make a motion and we spend up to $6,000 on this system. That gives us a little leeway from the 5,500.
All right, there's a motion that's been presented on the floor. So the motion is as presented. Is there a second to that motion? All right, Mr. Wheeler makes a second to that motion. Mr. Kennedy, did you want to amend the motion?
I would like this committee to suggest that a number higher than $6,000. I heard 50-some hundred just to get the unit set up, and then you've got to hire a locksmith, and there might be an electrician involved unless the vendor's going to do it. I would like input from Wes or from Anita in terms of what they think we should allow.
The electrician's already in, bid. But we can keep going and go higher.
No.
Mr. Duval?
From what I've heard Wes talk about, this seems like something that we had looked into this several years ago, and it had nothing to do with the payroll part. We had plans before the economy went down to do just what Wes is talking about, doing it, and I think it was we ran out of money, so we backed off. Sounds like he's describing the same thing that we had looked at, which is kind of tying into the sheriff's system, which actually dramatically brings down the cost because there's a head that you tie in that you don't have to purchase, so you're kind of you're buying the outer end, and it talks back. Well, we set up the network basically so that could work. So it sounds like you're doing the same thing that we had looked at before.
I just don't want the auditor coming back for another $100. If 6,000's enough, that's fine with me.
Any other discussion? All right, this is spending money. If there's no other discussion, did I get a second? Okay, that's been moved and seconded. So we're spending money. We'll need a roll call vote, please.
Could the motion be reread? I interjected things. I'm not certain what I'm voting on. I don't know what the dollar limit was.
Certainly. Mr. Hess, your motion?
I didn't hear what he said.
Who's asking for a, confirm the motion?
I make the motion to spend up to $6,000. That's $500 over, that's less than 10%. So.
Okay. Any other questions before roll call? If there are no other questions, a roll call, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Legess?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Miss Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Miss Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Miss Haas? Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Miss Zucolo?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Is there any old business to come before the committee? Seeing none, is there any new business? Mr. Legess?
Well, I just wanted to mention something. Our good friend, Mr. Bones' brother passed away early this morning, and if you're apt to pray or have a quiet time, please remember him in your prayers.
Thank you. If there is no other old business or new business, a motion to adjourn would be in order. Mr. Jess, Mr. Hess.
That's
Just a minute. Ms. Parker, you wanted to say something? Let me figure out how to do yours in terms of, what do I do for? Okay, Ms. Parker, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank Chairman Wheeler and Jason and Kevin for allowing me to sit in on this meeting during my recovery, and I really appreciate it because I don't like missing meetings. So thank you very much for making this happen for me. Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you with us. We're sorry it has to be under these circumstances, and we appreciate that you voted on those items that were before us.
Very important.
If there's nothing else, then a motion to adjourn from Mr. Chess and a second from Mr. Hess has been made. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.